Hi everyone, this is Nathan from Snap and welcome to another of our Snap XMP webinars. Not the most exciting webinars today, but a really important one as we're going to look at the removal of personal data, which is an important part of any survey project. It should take about 30 minutes and as ever I'll be pointing you to some supporting materials at the end. First of all, we'll look at deleting data in general, as there are a few things to consider when doing so and some places where you may find that your data is hiding that you hadn't thought about. We'll look at the options available for deleting a particular set of data, such as information collected before a certain date, and also how to remove an individual respondent's data, or perhaps anonymise any individual by removing personal identifiers. We'll then do something similar, but this time amending or anonymising all data using our bulk changes tool. In terms of why this is important, ultimately it comes down to regulations. In the UK and across Europe, we have GDPR regulations, and for those listening in from further afield, different countries and different states in the US have similar regulations governing the use and storage of personal data. As a sweeping statement, data should not be kept any longer than it's needed, and an individual has a right to request that their own data is deleted. And I'm sure you've all seen the big headlines about companies getting fined massive amounts of money due to data breaches. Well, the less personal data that you keep lying around, if there ever was a data breach or that data got into the wrong hand, the less likelihood that that data can then be used against you. Okay, let's head into the software to see where your data sits and how it can be deleted and anonymised. I'm going to be working in the webinars folder today, and although at times I'll be talking about Snap XMP desktop, remember that the desktop software is syncing with the online software of Snap XMP Online, and as such, deleting or editing data in one will delete it or edit it in the other. That is, unless you're making offline copies of your projects using offline mode, but we'll be discussing that one a little bit later. To begin with, I have a survey called In-Crowd Conference Survey, which has 321 cases or completed questionnaires. As you can see, if I pop into Snap Online, I've got exactly the same survey with the 321 cases. But moving back to desktop, initially I'm just going to delete all the data using the minus button. So you can see we've got options to say what's going to be deleted. Obviously we just want to delete the data, so the raw data. So I'll delete that one. I do get a warning. You can see that's taken it down to 0 cases. And if I pop back into Snap Online and just quickly refresh the screen, you can see that's taken the data from that survey as well. Now I can do exactly the same within Snap Online. This time I'm going to use a copy of the survey, so it's exactly the same survey, but it's a copy, so it's called V2. So I'll go into the survey. You can see it's got 321 cases. It's simply a case of going to collect and responses, and then we have delete all data. Now you can see that when I do that, I do have the option to restore that data. And to confirm, if I was deleting sort of my data on a regular basis, then there'd be multiple lines here to restore the data each time. But if I go back to the survey that I deleted earlier in desktop, so go back to version 1, again collect and responses, you can see I've got exactly the same option to restore that data. So I will quickly restore that from the survey. As I said, this was a survey which I deleted in desktop. And if I now pop back into desktop, I'll just quickly, I need to refresh again. You can see that for version 1, we've got 321. It does look a little bit strange because it's got 321/0, and for version 2, it's got 0/321. Once we actually open up one of these surveys, it will continue the synchronization and fully re-import those 321 cases. So I'll just go back into my survey now. Now, if I pop into the data entry window, It's worth noticing that at first glance it does look like there's now 642 cases, but actually if I go back and scroll through those first 321, you can see there is no data attached to them. And if I was to go back to the data entry window, sorry, the survey overview window, you can see it does just display the active cases. To confirm any tables, charts, reports, they will only use the active cases. If I move back to Snap Online and look at the version 2, we're going back into the survey where I still got some of the deleted data, so no data in my survey. So as before, I've got the option to restore that data. That option remains for a period of 90 days. After that, the data is fully removed from the system. So you have a bit of a fail-safe to get back any deleted data, which can sometimes be a good thing. If the survey is no longer active and you want to instantly and permanently delete all this data, then the other option would be to clone the original survey. And when you clone a survey, you have the option to either clone the data as well or not. So clone the survey about the data, and then we can actually delete the original completely. That would then delete the questionnaire, any analysis, and any data permanently. Now, I mentioned earlier about hiding places for your data. This is really referring to where you've perhaps made backups of your data or backups of your survey. So an obvious one is that we may well have cloned a survey and perhaps popped it into a new folder. If you've got access to Snap Desktop, then you may well have also cloned it, but perhaps to an offline location. So effectively stored on your computer somewhere. I should add that in offline mode, if you were to delete data, there is no sort of backup of that data, so it's permanently deleted. You don't have a restore option. But depending upon your local PC or network settings, you may find that the data and the survey end up in your recycle bin. So you have to gain one more place for your data to be hiding. Whether your survey is in offline mode or online mode, in desktop, you also have the option of right-clicking to make an archive. And in doing that, you have the option to say whether your data is going to be archived. So an archive, just to confirm, is effectively a bit like a zip folder that gets put in a location on your computer somewhere or your network. I said potentially that can include the data. So just need to be careful that you haven't got archives lurking around on your network somewhere as well. Obviously, you may well have an archive which doesn't have data, so that's a little bit different. You also need to consider if you've given share access to a survey. So again, if I just pop back into Snap Online, you can see these two surveys, V1 and V2, have some sort of people icon. I go into one of those and go into my shares. I've given share access to two different people, one as a full researcher and one as an analyst who has the option to download a CSV file. So again, you may well be deleting your survey, but there's nothing to say that perhaps they haven't downloaded that data, they haven't also cloned the survey. So again, just being careful that there's many different locations where your data can end up. Okay, we've looked at the deletion of all data. Let's now consider a requirement to delete certain data. So in today's example, I'm going to remove any data which was collected before a certain date. So we're going to move into a new survey. As mentioned, there are various guidelines mentioning data retention, but they don't tend to give specifics in terms of how long data can be held for. It comes down to you as an organisation setting an internal policy saying how long you're going to retain data for. So in short, you shouldn't keep it any longer than is needed. In my All Good Hospital Admissions survey, I've got data going back as far as 2010. So I'm going to remove any data older than 2020. Now, the easiest way to do this is to export the required data out of Snap, delete the entire data set from within Snap, so all the older data and all the newer data, and then re-import the required data back into Snap. Now, deleting your data sounds quite scary, so as ever, we would advise making an archive of the survey first, in case you're having a bad day and end up perhaps accidentally deleting the survey and everything else with it. Remember, you can make an archive of a survey and its data simply by right-clicking from the survey overview and selecting archive. I'm not going to worry about that today though, as I'm feeling pretty confident. It is only dummy data at the end of the day. And more importantly, if it does go horribly wrong, I'll probably just gloss over it and pretend it never happened. Okay, so the first step is to head into the data entry window. And looking at id.date, which is the date that the survey took place, you can see I've got 160 cases, but if I go back to the beginning, you can see data goes back as far as 2010, etc., through to, I think, 2022. Now, the first step is to export to Excel the data that you do want. So from the data entry window, File and Export. A few options in here. I'm going to export to Excel CSV. I'm selecting label rows, which is going to export the question text, and also code labels, which means it will export the words such as yes or no or good or bad, rather than the codes 1, 2, 3, etc. Ultimately, we don't really care how it exports, to be honest, because we're not going to be doing anything with that data, but we just need to make sure, however we export, that when it comes to importing, we import with those same options. I'm going to use a filter of id.date year is greater than 2020. So we'll export anyone who has clicked the survey link in 2021 or later. Or if it was a paper survey, it would be taking anyone where the data's been input back into Snap in 2021 or later. If I wanted to be a bit more specific, I could type in an expression such as id.date is perhaps greater than the 31st of the 3rd, 20. So that would export everyone who's completed the survey in the sort of financial year of 2021 onwards. But today we're just going to do greater than 2020. If you're feeling really brave, you could just export to clipboard and then in a moment import from clipboard as well, but I really wouldn't recommend that, as you can almost guarantee that in between exporting to clipboard and importing from your clipboard, you can end up answering an email and in doing so probably copying and pasting an email address or something like that. And then when it comes to importing that data, you realize that actually all that data which was sat on your clipboard is now actually, it's just got someone's email address instead. And that actually happened to me the other day when in between an export and an import, I did a quick screenshot, pasted it into a Word document, and then when it came to actually bringing my data back in, I was rather sad because I'd lost it all. But luckily, it was just me practicing for this webinar. So today, rather than doing it to the clipboard, I'm going to pop it off to a file on my desktop. So I'm just going to browse off to my desktop. And you can see it's going to name it as All Good Hospital Admissions CSV. And if I click OK, I do have a warning just telling me that there's some sort of no replies in there, but I'm just going to click yes to say that's fine. And today, although we have 160 cases in the entire survey, it's only imported or exported, should I say, the 114 which were completed more recently. We then do the scary bit, which is to delete all the data in Snap. But remember, if all else fails, then hopefully you have that archive. So I'll close down the survey. Use the minus key as we did earlier, being careful just to delete the raw data. You can see that's removed all the data, so down to 0 cases. Open the survey back up again. Back into the data entry window. And this time file and import. Now remember, we do need to make sure that we're matching up the options we chose earlier, so label row and code labels. It's still an Excel CSV, and I'll just make sure I'm still pointing off to my desktop file. And click OK. You can see that's brought in the 114 cases which I exported earlier. Again, it does look like we have a lot more data in there in this window, but if we jump to the end, you can see all the data is from 2021 or later. As I said, remember, although in here it does look like you've got a lot more data, all these deleted cases, they don't count towards anything. When you build tables, charts, reports, it completely ignores them, and it just takes into account the fact that we have the 114 new cases. What we do need to be mindful of is that in being cautious, we have made some archives and possibly some clones of the survey and data, and when deleting things, they may have ended up in our recycle bin. So in being careful, you just need to be careful that you haven't ended up with data in even more locations than you began with. So basically, make sure at the end of this, you delete all your archives and clones once you're happy that any amendments have gone to plan. Plus, of course, we have also just popped an Excel CSV file on my desktop. So again, I'd be really need to careful that we delete that one as well. So we now know how to remove data on bulk, be that all the data or specific data. Let's now look at a scenario where an individual has asked for their data to be removed, or you need to anonymize an individual. So I'm going to open up another survey. In this new survey, which this time has got some demographic questions in there, including an email address, which is question 5. From the data entry window, I could search for a particular individual. So I could use the filter button, and I could type Q5 equals, and I've just got some made up email addresses. So person 87, see question 5 down here. So got some fairly generic email addresses. So Q5 equals person 87, click OK, and you can see it's taking me straight to that person. Now, it is worth noting that when you're searching for a literal response question, which question 5 is, that it is case sensitive. So, of course, when people type email addresses, they type in uppercase, lowercase, and everything in between. So if you're not able to find someone you're searching for, then it would be worth adding the additional as lowercase equals person 87. That way it will find them even if they typed it in with a capital S in the middle or a capital P at the beginning. If you're searching for a string of text, such as perhaps a full name, then you just need to be aware that you need to use speech marks. Now, I don't actually have a name question in my questionnaire, but I have planted a response into question 3A. So if I was to say Q3A equals, and then because I'm doing a string of text, I say Oscar Stewart. So I need to pop that in speech marks. Double or single is fine. I'd normally go for double. Now, if I click OK initially, it's not actually going to find anyone. And that's because, of course, as I said a moment ago, this is case sensitive. So I'd imagine Oscar's type their name with a capital O. So if I say Q3A as lowercase equals Oscar Stewart, you can see it's found one case, which is number 34. Yeah, it's this response here. So once found, we've got a couple of options. We can just double click and remove that data, just delete it out. Whilst I'm here, I should probably go into the email address, do the same. And just remember that you may well be making use of a personal identifier, which would generally be held under id.name. So that would be used if you are tracking someone with a logged in survey. So again, I could delete that one out as well. That would be how to anonymize an individual. What I can also do is just completely remove the data for the entire case. Just need to bear in mind that whereas earlier when we deleted all data, we had the option of restoring it. When you delete an individual or make an edit to an individual, that change is final. So you can see if I take that filter off, as I scroll through, case number 33 has got all the data, case 34 is removed. So again, any data which was there will no longer be included in any reports. You can also delete individuals within Snap Online. So if I go into that same survey within Snap Online, so I need to do that under Collect and Responses, and we have Delete and Erase. And I'm going to type in a similar expression to what we used earlier. So Q5 as lowercase equals person 7. And I'll search for anyone who falls into that category. You can see it's actually found 8 cases in total, because person number 7 is this one, but also person number 70 has got person 7 in it as well, as does person 71. So we might need to try and be a bit more specific. So if I do person 7 at, now when I click find, it's actually going to struggle to find it because of the @ symbol. Snap is now assuming that that is a command feature or filter operator, and as such is trying to perform a function. So we just need to treat it as a string of text again. So we can just make use of the speech marks. You can see this time it's just found one person, which was the person we were looking for, person 7. And again, we just got the option to delete. As before though, that's a permanent delete, so there's no option to restore that once that's done. Okay, for the final part today, we're going to head back into Snap Desktop to look at a feature called bulk changes. So I move back into Desktop. Just do an update of all the changes, just to take into account the fact that we've done some deleting in both Snap Online and in Desktop. As the name suggests, bulk changes is for when you want to make changes across the board, although by using a more sort of specific filter, we can still use it to edit a subset of your respondents. A good example of this might be where you have a logged in survey and you're storing their username in the id.name, which we spoke about just a moment ago. And that's the default setup when you're creating a survey which uses participants that are logged in, although there is the option for Snap to remove the username when that data comes back in. But if you've forgotten to do that, or you just wish to remove the personal identifier perhaps at a later date, then bulk changes is the way forward. So within the data entry window, you can see, as I said, that we've got id.name with a personal identifier, and we've also got that question 5 with all the different email addresses in. So I'm going to use bulk changes to remove all the personal identifiers from those 2 questions. So if I click on bulk changes, just remove the filter which is left over from earlier. So first thing to do is to specify which questions we're interested in amending. So id.name, and you can do a comma and at the same time do Q5. So both literal response questions. And then we've got a number of options, so I'm actually just going to clear the response. I click OK. You can see because I've got no filter, it's just warning me that this will affect every single person. So if I click yes, and you can see that's affected 165. Of course, it says 167 there because remember there are 2 deleted cases within that 167. There are other options available rather than just clearing. Let's take question 5, for example. So the email address question. It might be that actually rather than just clearing the data, I want to make it more obvious that there was data there. So I could take question 5 and instead I could set a response. So I could perhaps type in the word removed. Now we just need to bear in mind that built into the questionnaire design window of question 5 is a pattern saying that the response to question 5 needs to be in the format of an email address. So if I click OK now, it will make those changes. It's 165, but you can see it's input the word removed, but next to it there's an ER for error. So all the data in there is an error state. So If this was a closed survey, really what I'd now need to do is just go into question 5 and perhaps remove that pattern from the question. Obviously, if it was a live survey, you wouldn't want to be removing the pattern. You'd wait and do that once the survey is closed. If you were perhaps having a bad day when you designed the survey and maybe included an answer which shouldn't have been there, then you could also use bulk changes to make some changes there after the event. So in my example today, I have question number 4. And if you look down the different categories, I've got an option for 36 to 40, but there's also an option for 36 to 45. So basically sort of 2 overlapping ones. So first of all, I'm going to do a quick filter just to see how many people chose the 36 to 40. I say Q4 equals 4, which is my sort of the smaller category. So there's 5 people that fall into that category. And I'm going to use bulk changes to effectively change anyone who said 36 to 40. I'm going to get it to bulk change them to actually put them into the category of 36 to 45. Now, obviously, if I've only got 5 today, arguably it might be quicker just to manually change these, but obviously potentially you might have hundreds to do. So again, I'll take the filter off and go into bulk changes. So I'm going to say search for anyone who's chosen option number 4. The question that we're looking to edit is question number 4, and I'm going to set the response, and I'm going to pick instead 36 to 45. So basically I'm going to take anyone from the 36 to the 40 and push them instead into the 36 to 45 category. Click OK and OK again, and as you can see, it's modified everyone to the 5th option. So now when I do a search of Q4 equals 4, you can see there's no one in that category anymore. Now, obviously with great power does come great responsibility. So if I do spot any of your surveys suddenly with 100% positive response rate, then do expect a phone call from me in the next couple of days. Okay, that's everything I had planned to show you today. We've looked at deleting a survey and the corresponding data, including thinking about where you may have hidden that data away. We've removed a particular set of data, which today was based on id.date variable. We've edited and removed an individual, and we've just finished by looking at the bulk changes option, which allow the quick editing of data across your data set. I should add that today's webinar has covered some aspects of GDPR compliance, and with that also covering some of the principles behind the handling of personal identifiable information for those listening from the US. But it is only a small part of that, and as such we do run a 1-hour course titled GDPR Compliance, which I'd recommend whether or not you're based in Europe or further afield. You can find information on this using the first QR code on the left, or just heading off to the training pages on our website. I've also added a QR code to take you to the main page on our support hub for anonymizing your data using that bulk changes option that we just looked at. Don't worry, I will be kind of emailing you all these in the next day or two, along with a recording of today. And then if you have got 2 minutes, it would be great if you could take that to fill out our short feedback form today. That can be found using the QR code on the right. Again, I will pop a link to that in the email I send you. Thank you for joining me today, and we'll hopefully see you again soon.